It is September 16th, 2023. Welcome to Political Dharma with Alan Zundell. This week, Cornel West announced he had appointed a new campaign manager, Peter Daou, best known for his role in Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. The two-time Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein, who was Cornel West's interim campaign manager, said that she had recommended Daou for the job. So who is Peter Daou and what does this move mean? First, let's have one take on this situation.
Cornel West cannot stop saying that Joe Biden is the lesser of two evil and that Donald Trump is a fascist, but Joe Biden isn't. And so Cornel West is basically campaigning for Joe Biden when he says that, and he doesn't care. So I said to him this: campaign to pick up traction. This is the opposite way to do it. Who's ever advising you sounds like an infiltrator.
But why do you keep saying advise me? I'm thinking.
So I don't know if you caught what I said. I don't know who's advising you. It sounds like an infiltrator. And then he just snapped. What do you think about? He's like, he doesn't have any advisors. Why wouldn't you have advisors? Of course he did. And he was already in talks with the guy he just hired, this guy, Peter Daou, who is an infiltrator. That's amazing. No wonder Cornel West overreacted because he hired this guy. He said, I am very blessed to have my brother, Peter Daou. Now, I'm going to tell you who Peter Daou is. Peter Daou is an infiltrator. Peter Daou was one of the hitmen for Hillary Clinton. He smeared everybody 24/7, including myself, including Bernie Sanders, anybody who voted for Bernie Sanders, third-party voters, Jill Stein. This guy was a hitman, one of the biggest smear merchants for Hillary Clinton's corporatism and warmongering.
That was Jimmy Dore on his YouTube channel. To assess this interpretation, let's back up a bit and ask, what is the background on Peter Daou? Daou was born in Lebanon in 1965, immigrated to the U.S. in 1984, and became successful in the New York music scene in the 1990s. Daou got politically active in anti-war politics after the election of George W. Bush in 2000 and his invasion of Iraq the following year. Daou soon became a well-known political blogger. In 2004, he was communications advisor for John Kerry's unsuccessful presidential candidacy. And in 2008, he backed Hillary Clinton over Barack Obama in the Democratic presidential primary, running Clinton's digital operation. He remained an outspoken Clinton loyalist against Bernie Sanders in the 2016 primary, but within a few years after the election was apologizing for his role in the rancor between the Clinton and Sanders camps online, which he felt contributed to the election of Donald Trump. He was a Sanders supporter by the time of the 2020 primary. In a December 2019 article in the New Republic, Daou was quoted as saying, "I'm late to politics. I'm late to learning about socialism and capitalism and systemic issues and neoliberalism. I never learned those things." Here's a clip of Daou talking with Brianna Joy Gray on her Hear the Burn show in late 2019.
What has happened in my mind is I'm just looking back and thinking, okay, I've been in politics for 20 years. I accidentally fell into politics. I never studied it. I grew up in a different country. I was a musician. I was a music producer doing house music, right, and playing jazz. So my question now is, after 20 years in politics, what do I have to show for my activism? What do I have to show for my years of working within the Democratic Party? You know, I think the perception of me as some DNC insider is very far from the truth. Like I was a progressive activist who got hired by Hillary Clinton to reach out to progressives. That my role was the outreach guy. So I was the bridge. You know, of course, you get sucked into the system, right? But so it's not like I was some long time, DNC or the establishment operative. I was a complete outsider. But now the reason I moved away from, the question you're asking and starting to go to much more systemic questions is because I'm looking at my 20 years in politics and realizing, wait a minute, things have gotten worse, not better. Yes, certainly, Obama was elected or we had the blue wave. Democrats win occasional elections. Policies become less draconian. They do things that are better than Republican policies, things like the ACA.
Right.
But the ultimate trajectory is things are getting worse in my mind. You see all these terrible things happening. I start asking, okay, at a very root level, questioning ideas of capitalism, questioning the idea of the two-party system and democracy. Is this really still functioning as a democracy? Was it ever? Because this country has a pretty ugly history if you look back in terms of how people of color have been treated, et cetera. But I look at Bernie Sanders and I think, wait a minute, he is going to the very root questions of uprooting this entire system and replacing it with something better. And no other candidate's doing that. So I needed to put aside whatever, anger, frustrations, scars from 2016 and just look at the man, look at the movement, look at the people around him and say, this is really special. Bernie Sanders is a transformational figure. I cannot hold on to old, fights and the bitterness that happens after you fight with people. I simply just have to wake myself up, reboot, and reach out and reconnect. So I did get to see the system from deep inside it. I laughed, Rihanna, because, I've been welcomed by 95% of Bernie Sanders supporters, but I keep having people say, oh, he's grifting or he's being opportunistic or he's got some, and I laugh because I keep saying you don't grift to the left, right? I mean, if you want to be opportunistic about politics, all the money's on the right and the center, et cetera, and in the establishment. It's certainly not going for grassroots activism and the Bernie Sanders movement, right?
That's Daou in his own words, speaking about his trajectory up until about 2000. In 2000, he left the Democrats to become an independent, and by 2022 was identifying himself as an anti-capitalist, non-specific leftist with anarchist sympathies. I can't argue with that position. Most recently, Daou was a campaign manager in Marianne Williamson's primary campaign, which he resigned from in May earlier this year. Despite reports of turmoil in the Williamson campaign, Daou denied that he left due to anything like that, but rather because of his family, specifically involving caring for his wife's ailing parents. So now he's joined Cornel West's campaign for the nomination of the Green Party to run in the 2024 presidential election. And we have to look back now and say, how can we assess this trajectory of Daou's over the last, 7-8 years or so? Now, Jimmy Dore gave one interpretation of it, that he is an infiltrator trying to, for some reason, join Cornel West's campaign and steer it in some direction, presumably to the advantage of the Democrats and Joe Biden's campaign. To believe that story, you would have to believe that within a few years of the 2016 election, Daou started to deceive people and deceitfully pretended to be remorseful for his role in escalating verbal and online onslaughts between the Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders camps, for his role in that, for the rancor of all that he made the rounds publicly and apologized for that. He was doing this all as a pretense, that he then supported Bernie Sanders and maybe tried to influence Sanders to drop out in the 2020 primary in favor of Joe Biden and endorse Biden. Now when I look back, I think Bernie Sanders didn't have a lot of choice at that point. He could have gone on, but he wouldn't have gotten the delegates he needed, especially with all the establishment Democrats coalescing around Biden. So I'm not sure about that, but maybe he had some role in trying to sabotage the Sanders campaign in some way. I don't even know that he had a prominent role in that campaign in 2020. Already, I'm giving you the skeptical view of this interpretation. And then maybe Daou went on a few years after the 2020 campaign and looked around and says, now, who do I have to sabotage in this election cycle? So he joined the Williamson campaign, somehow took part in turmoil within the campaign and left it when it was barely hanging on. Now, this, of course, is Williamson a big threat to Biden? So far, doesn't appear so. I don't think there were any signs from the start that she would have been a serious threat. She didn't do real well in the primaries in 2020. So he got on board Williamson, again, deceitfully as a pretense, some kind of infiltrator, and sabotaged that campaign. And then he left that in turmoil and came over to Cornel West campaign in some way to steer him in a direction that wouldn't be too damaging to the Democrats. And from the things that both West and Dow have said, I would presume that they both think that the Democrats are marginally better than the Republicans, at least. So is he going to steer them in a direction to make sure it's not damaging to the Democrats? That's one interpretation. Okay, this guy turned around and put on this pretense and carried it forward through all these years, in the interim years, say like 7 years or so, and keep trying to join campaigns that he thought could be any kind of a threat, even if a trivial threat, and to sabotage them or redirect them and somehow. That's one interpretation. And I'm not posing in the most favorable way for that argument, because obviously I don't think it is very convincing. The other interpretation would be the one that I think is more convincing. In the first place, he had a change of heart. After the heat of the campaign of 2016, when Hillary Clinton lost in the Electoral College and Donald Trump won election, a lot of people had soul searching to do about whether Hillary Clinton was the best candidate for the job, whether she handled her campaign well, whether Bernie Sanders might have won against Trump, and why the establishment Democrats were so opposed to Bernie Sanders. We saw the move towards a more fascistic state under Donald Trump and his election denialism. And so this guy's looking around and he's saying, where has the country been heading all these years, and how well have the Democrats been preventing the move towards the right over the last couple of decades? And decided that maybe the Democrats did not have the right path. Maybe there was something to the analysis of socialists that, as long as the Democrats upholded a capitalist system and tried to find workarounds for the problems of it, that we would do better. Well, he became skeptical of that, like a lot of other people. Now, I've been skeptical of it a long time, but I had a similar trajectory to Dow, only a little bit younger, because when I was young, the Vietnam War was going on, and both the Democrats and the Republicans were in favor of it, and I was not in favor of it, not only because I was in danger of the draft, but because looking into it, even at that young age, I said, this is crazy. Don't want to make this about me, though, but some perspective on where I'm coming from. I did get interested in socialism, and then down through the years, kind of was, what are our choices? There's no, socialism is not being discussed. You can't raise it. It's a taboo topic. And it wasn't until Bernie Sanders came around that I could come forward fully and say, okay, I do have socialist sympathies. Let me look into it more deeply and say, where exactly I stood on the spectrum of socialism. And of course, moving towards other candidates. I supported Bernie Sanders not in 2016. I was a Jill Stein supporter because I had already migrated to the Green Party. In 2020, I supported Joe Biden because I felt we needed to show a big vote margin between the candidates against Trump so that Trump couldn't go around saying that the election was stolen. Joe Biden didn't do well enough, and I'm skeptical that he can do well again the next time. But this is about Dow, made it about myself right now. So my interpretation is that Dow, looking at the results of the 2016 election and looking at the trajectory of the country over the many decades between 2000 and now, decided that the Democrats were not the best party to beat our move towards the right, and started saying maybe he had misinterpreted the political situation, moved closer to socialism, and even closer yet. Now he's looking around for a candidate that can help that movement go forward. At first, he saw Marianne Williamson as maybe the most progressive candidate in the Democratic primaries this time around, and decided to help them out. And because his wife's parents were ailing, he dropped out, and then he looked around again and says, well, just like I did. Cornel West is announcing a run for the presidential election on a third-party ticket. Maybe this is something to get involved in. Maybe this is a way to move things forward. So I ask you, what is more reasonable, that the guy is a years-long serial deceptor who is trying to steer all these progressive candidacies into the rocks, or that he's somebody who had a genuine change of heart and decided that his role in the 2016 election was maybe he did it badly, and maybe he was even on the wrong side of that primary. Which one is more convincing? Now, I would imagine a lot of people that are listening to this have had similar trajectories in their life in one way or another, that socialism was maybe in their heads, but probably not, going back to before Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. Maybe they had thought about it, maybe they looked into it, but they certainly were not heavily engaged in electoral politics because there was no openings for socialists. And Bernie Sanders opened the door to that. So those who were already socialist friendly or socialist curious were able to look at it more deeply and come public forward and talk about it. And even those who were, never thought about it started to think about where's our country heading? And is capitalism with this inequality of wealth and climate change and all the other things that can be traced back to the continual need for more and more profits on the part of corporations, are all those problems related to the fundamental economic structure of society? People began asking those questions. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people who are watching this or who have watched Jimmy Dore's videos haven't been through a similar trajectory where they've had changes of hearts, where their political philosophy has evolved over time. And I don't see any reason why Daou couldn't have been one of those who did that. And I would encourage him to keep moving forward as his best judgment tells him to. And I do that for you as well. So what about Cornel West and Jill Stein? What would be their motive in taking on Peter Daou as a campaign manager as opposed to anyone else that might be an experienced campaign manager? Well, Daou himself does not have a lot of experience as a campaign manager. What he does have is experience as a digital communications director. And if you notice, Cornel West right now is running a digital campaign. You'll see him giving multiple interviews a week online to various interviewers who have podcasts or YouTube channels. And often when you see him on those videos, he's sitting in the same room with the same backdrop, much like me, and his camera is kind of pointed up at him a little bit so you can tell it's a laptop that he's being interviewed through. That's not the phrase I want. That it's a laptop that he's using to communicate with the interviewer. So he's doing a digital campaign, very inexpensive, which would make sense because he's not going to have a lot of money as a Green Party candidate. He doesn't need to go around to big donors asking for money or use that money to fly around the country and give speeches or go to Iowa or buy ads on TV or any of the things a major party candidate would have to do to win their primary election and get their party's nomination. All he has to do is get an experienced person like Jill Stein to guide him through the delegate selection process of the Green Party. There are other candidates for the presidential nomination in the Green Party. They may be well known within the Green Party. I'm not even sure about that. Probably not to most Greens. But Cornel West is very well known. If he can get steered through that process and get the nomination, that's all he needs to do. He doesn't need to raise money for that. So the digital campaign and Peter Daou's assistance with that would be to reach a niche market, start building support, raise some money so that he can help the Green Party get ballot access in more states, and then start reaching out further and further to mainstream voters through this digital campaign. If you can become a truly competitive, I don't mean competitive in the sense that he can win, but if you can reach enough people and become a big enough threat to the Democrats in particular, then the mainstream media will pay more attention to him as we get towards the general election campaign. Because mainstream media is disdainful and hostile even towards third-party candidates. But if you can get their attention by showing that you bring the threat of a spoiler, they'll give you more attention. So I would see that as their strategy. This is an inexpensive digital strategy to reach the online niche market of people to the left, and then to get the nomination of the Green Party and build toward a mainstream audience, get more media attention, and then a full-blown campaign to the extent they can afford to. That I see as the strategy, and for that, Peter Daou makes a lot of sense with his expertise in digital communications and online media warfare, although I hope he's learned more positive ways to run a campaign than the role he took on in Hillary's campaign. So that's it for this week. Maybe a short show. I'm not sure after I put in all the clips how the timing of this will be. But I thank you very much for watching. I've been really busy with the Green Party here in Oregon, trying to shore it up, and also relatively busy with a campaign for voting reform here to make a more fair playing field between different political parties, maybe give openings to things like the Green Party. Busy in that, so I haven't had as much to focus on these videos, hoping to give much more attention to these videos in the coming weeks and months. Once actually what we're doing in the Green Party here in Oregon is trying to change the bylaws and the Constitution to try to fix some of the problems. People keep talking about the dysfunction of the Green Party. Well, here, let me maybe like another little editorial here about presidential candidates. People tend to get excited watching the presidential candidates during the races and the competition leading up to the election. It doesn't matter who wins. It matters in a certain sense, but whoever you're going to back, if you're anywhere left of the Democratic establishment, that candidate is very unlikely to win. Take Cornel West, you could get very excited about him. He's not going to win without divine intervention. So worrying about whether he's going to endorse Joe Biden or he's going to drop out ahead of time or any of that, what's the point? Because he's not going to win anyway. The opportunity of a candidate, and this is the same for Bernie Sanders. With, I'm over 70 years old and I've been watching politics for a long time. I was skeptical that Bernie Sanders would win the first time around, that the Democratic establishment would not sabotage him, what they did. So you can get excited about Bernie Sanders, but the important thing was not so much whether he's going to win or not, because he didn't have the greatest chance of winning, given the playing field was stacked against him, but what he was able to generate, a movement, and to sustain that movement, and to organize that movement, and to create institutions that can last beyond election cycles. So the value of exciting candidates for election is to build something and to capitalize on that by institutionalizing it in some way that can move it forward in a permanent way. That's why I'm involved in the Green Party once again. That's why I'm excited about promoting Cornel West, because he can reach a lot more people, get excited, and if they get involved in trying to reform and improve the Green Party, we have an institution that already has electoral access. We have changes in our voting laws, then we can really be competitive. So, just a word of advice. Don't focus on the ins and outs of the presidential candidates or any other candidates. Focus on the long-term view. It can even be a short-term view. What you're trying to build, utilizing the attention that goes to these candidates. What you can build that's going to last beyond this race, because no matter who gets in office, even if it's Cornel West, he's going to have a lot of things stacked against getting anything done, and maybe even assassination attempts or secret coup attempts, like against John F. Kennedy. That if he moves too far to the left. So nobody's going to get in office and change this trajectory of the country in an instant. It's probably going to take much more serious problems developing over time and some breakdown of our societal institutions and customs and traditions and politics and economics and the rest of it. It's going to be cracking down the road. And at that point, you really want to have networks and organizations and institutions in place that can help to build something new. At least that's how I see it. Again, if you're interested in what I have to say and the kind of topics I'm covering, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave comments. I'm glad to hear what people have to say. I do read them and give serious consideration to them and try to respond to them if I get time. Thanks, and maybe see you next week. Bye.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus, the moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.